Hello, Snackers. This is Kareem Iskander. I'm a tech advocate with Cisco Learning and Certifications.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt DiNapoli. I'm a manager of developer advocacy with Cisco DevNet.
Welcome to episode 71 of DevNet Snack Minute.
DevNet Snack Minute is your weekly 10-minute all things DevNet where we talk about APIs, coding, or just some cool stuff we think you might like to know.
And the thing we're going to talk to you about today with my colleague Jason is Ansible roles. Jason, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, thanks, Kareem. Hi, my name is Jason Belk, and I'm a senior technical advocate in the Learning Certifications group. And I'm really excited to talk about the feature of Ansible roles, which I feel like people get started in Ansible, but then they don't ever make that leap and jump into some of the more complex features such as Ansible roles.
I'm really excited. Yeah, I'm excited about it because I've kind of played with Ansible at a very high level. And so digging into the nitty gritty sometimes is super fun. So I'm excited to check it out.
Not to mention that it also is a topic on our blueprint for the DevNet Expert exam. So this might come in handy as you're studying.
Yeah, Jason, can you explain what Ansible roles are and then give us a little bit of an insight into them?
Sure. Yeah. Ansible roles are effectively a built-in feature within Ansible that you can use to package up your tasks, your variables, some maybe setting default values for your variables. All the stuff that you typically would be doing in a playbook, you're effectively abstracting that away into a package. And then you're able to import that into your playbook. So that way it helps you deal with, basically create some levels of abstraction in your playbook. So that way, if you're doing the same things every time, if you have the same tasks in every playbook, you can share that within your team. You can import that within your playbooks. And even just things like variable naming conventions, creating some standards within your team. I feel roles help yourself save time. Like just in Python, you can import your own custom packages. In Ansible, you have the same type of thing with Ansible roles.
That's exactly what I was thinking. These sound like modules in Python.
Yeah, and the way you can create them, it's because it expects a certain file structure. Is you just say Ansible-Galaxy init, and then the name of the role you want, and that Ansible-Galaxy command is built in when you install Ansible. And so you don't need to learn the fancy file structure. You can just use that command to create a skeleton role. And then the Ansible documentation has some great details on the different ways you can include roles. There's several different ways, pros and cons. I'm not going to go into all of them in our demos, but I'm going to showcase some of the neat things you can do from a network engineering perspective, because most of the examples they give focus more on the server and cloud side.
We love demos, but doesn't it sound a little bit like Jinja templating, or is that not like, is it the same concept?
Yeah. So Ansible roles allow us to take our templating and bundle that into a set of tasks, variables, and other things. So in a typical Ansible playbook, you have your playbook file, you have your inventory file, and then you probably have some variable files for host vars, group vars, and things like that. And then usually you also have a templates directory that has all your Jinja 2 templates. And those Jinja 2 templates are basically like configuration files oftentimes where you have your running config, you swapped out a few variables, or maybe a snippet of a running config that you swapped out a few variables. So you can take all of those components I was just talking about apart from the playbook itself and then pull them into a role. And then in the future, let's say you're always using the same interface loopback template. You can put that into a role. So there's a subdirectory in the role structure for templates. There's a subdirectory for variables. There's a subdirectory for tasks. And so if you always have the same tasks that are configuring the same templates, you can just pull that into a role, and then you can reuse that across multiple different playbooks. And then your actually main playbook is pretty clean. So you just say import role, my loopback configuration role, import role, my pre-check role, and then so your main playbook is just calling off the different set of tasks and roles and variables that you have abstracted away in these different packages that you've created. And you don't have to do anything special. You literally can just take your existing tasks, your existing templates, your existing variables, and dump them in this certain file structure that the roles are expecting, and then reuse them across all your playbooks.
That sounds awesome. I've always, when I've come across playbooks in the past, I've been like, oh, it looks like they're doing the same thing 3 times. Why can't we just package this up? Yeah. And I wasn't super clear on what roles were. So this is exciting to get this kind of laid out for me. Yeah. Can we take a look at a demo or an example of what you're talking about here?
Sure. Yeah. I've taken these examples for an existing code exchange that Barry Weiss from our learning and search team has created that works with the always-on DevNet sandbox for iOS XE. And so I took his existing code exchange repo, and then I've just extended it and done a pull request and added in these roles examples. So after the session, you can go in at any time to this existing code exchange example and play around with these roles, run them on the always-on sandbox, and be off and running for yourself. And I've tried to document them with comments as well, so you can understand what we're going on here. So the first role I have here is for a playbook. I call it basic roles example. Basically, basic roles, just importing roles. So one way you can import the roles is just at the play level. So you have the roles keyword, and then you have a list of roles, and it's going to execute whatever tasks are in that role before you even start your playbook. So that's I'm going to show two different ways of using roles. This is probably the lowest hanging fruit one. If you know everything I want in this role, I want to execute before I even start my task, you can just put the name of the role there in the roles directory, and then it will pull in the existing tasks. So in this case, I have on my left here in VS Code, I'll go to my show command basic role. So it's under my roles directory. I have show command basic, and I literally just have one file under a task directory. So it looks in the roles directory, looks in the name of the roles, the task directory, and pulls in the main.yaml file, which is what it's going to pull in for those tasks. And it's just going to literally run one task of sending two show commands and then register that output to a variable called show command output. So from the playbook perspective, it's let's go back to the basic one. From the playbook perspective, it's literally one task of displaying the output, but it kind of hides the complexity of doing those show commands, where all those show commands are being done in this single line here. And then it creates that variable in the runtime memory. And so we know the name of that variable is going to be show command output. And we know there's going to be a sub variable that we want to look up for standard outlines. And so literally when we run this playbook, it's going to run that role, run those show commands, and then our single task in our playbook is then going to print out those show command lines. And I'll run that here while you ask any questions.
Well, I just want to make a comment, and you said it earlier, which was now we can start to codify things that our teams are doing all the time over and over again, and just either share them with each other or make them kind of a standard practice. And instead of saying, hey, every time you run an update or every time you need to show a config, make sure that you're doing the show run config, so that we can check to make sure that those things are run appropriately. And everyone's like, oh, now we got to put in 5 lines of YAML to do this every time. No, you just got to do one and just use that role. Yeah. Like that's exciting.
And we're doing this is a simple example where we're doing a show command, right? Imagine if you're multiplying this into a huge automation project that your team has taken on, and you got to divide up those tasks. You can easily divide the different tasks to a person, and then they bring them in as an Ansible role where your application just kind of integrates all together. Adding Git to this, GitHub to this, and adding a CI/CD pipeline would be a completely other massive undertaking, but it'd be fun.
You could have it automatically download the role for you, do a Git clone for your project, all that kind of fun stuff. So one thing I wanted to mention that came to mind while we were talking about that is a feature people use within roles that I'm not going to showcase here is oftentimes people will do conditionals in the roles to check the device type, and then they'll have subtasks that will say, if it's running iOS, do these set of tasks. If it's doing XR, do these set of tasks. So that there's ways of building logic structures in there that behind the scenes do a lot of the heavy lifting, and then pull that conditionals based on the common Ansible variables of inventory host name, the other built-in Ansible variables that give you those key values that you can then make conditionals off of. So from that, I want to show that. So we have in our play here, we ran the playbook. I didn't do -v. So the first task ran the show commands. You can see here, it even has the name of the role and then a colon and then the name of the task. And so we immediately know that this is a role based because it has a colon. You can see the next one that's not part of a role does not have the colon. So we ran the show commands, and then my only task in my playbook is to take that show command output, the standard output, and then just print it to the screen. And so we have our show IP interface brief, and then show IP route here as well. And I'll move on to we have an intermediate example. I'm not going to take the time to do because the advanced example includes a lot of that, which I think is really where a lot of the bells and whistles is going to start turning in people's heads. So I have 2 different roles I'm pulling into this one. And I have a pre-post checks role, and then I have a configure loopback role. So I've taken basically the function of what I want and put them into separate roles on purpose. So that way I can modularize and I can say, first, I want to do my checks before we do our change. Then I want to do my change. And then I want to do my checks again. And you can actually feed in variables into roles. And so I have here, I'm importing a role named pre-post checks. And then within that same indentation level, I have a variable called pre-post flag that I've created. I'm feeding in pre to say, basically, this is my pre-check. And then I have my next roles configure loopback. Nothing too special happening in this one. Basically, I have some Jinja 2 templates in this role, some variables, and it's going to configure several loopbacks on our device. And then our pre-post checks, I'm now going to do the same pre-post check role again, this time saying post. And it's going to run my pre-post checks now with a post appendum. So let me run this, and while it's running, I'll explain what's going on behind the scenes.
I'm actually interested in seeing the pre-post checks implementation because I want to see how those variables apply within the actual role itself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll do the tags just to kind of show that. So we have tags. I think conf is short for configure. Yep. And so I have two different plays. Basically, the first play is configuring the loopbacks and doing the pre-post checks, and my second play is rolling it back. So in my configure loopback, I have a rollback flag that I've called true. That basically allows me to if I have that flag variable fed into the role, it's going to take whatever it was and do the no commands, and basically roll back that change. So in the first chain, I don't have that flag, and so basically the flow is going to do the pre-checks, it's going to do the configuration, it's going to do the post checks, and then the second play, it's going to do pre-checks again, and then it's going to do a rollback, removing those loopbacks, and then do post checks again. And I actually had created a custom variable for those pre and post checks where you can feed in your own list of show commands if you wanted to override the existing show IP interface brief, show IP route. So in the first play, I show that you don't need that it's an optional parameter. And then the second play, I give an example. If you want to have your own commands override the existing commands, you can override those on the role as well. So for those pre and post checks, you can see on the left here, so I'll go to the tasks. And this looks really wordy because I'm doing a lot of fancy variable stuff to make it as automated as possible. Basically, the flow that we're doing in this role is that when the role is imported, it's going to use the Linux date time to take a snapshot of the date time. So that way we get a unique file name. It takes that unique file name, sets it to a variable. This is kind of a fun trick to do in Ansible where you set a fact in the play to have a much shorter name, so you don't have to keep using that super long name. So I take that date timestamp, and then I feed that date timestamp into the file paths. And so I'm creating a file path of an outputs directory, the name of my device, pre-post flag is that pre. Remember, we have pre and post is that variable we're feeding in. So we're creating two different directories based on whether we do it pre or post. And if I scroll up, we can see our outputs directory have two different directories, pre-change and post-change, and that's based on my pre-post flag. So you can see pre_change, pre-change, post_change, post-change. So datestamp creates, basically within here our files with our pre and post outputs, which I'll show. And then we basically do our show commands. So we do CLI command, the list of commands we have in our variables. We loop over that list. We register that result. And then we basically create I have a pre-post template J2 in this role that basically takes that show command output, feeds it into this template, which is down here. So you can see it basically says for basically each result we see in our show command result, it takes that string output, says, the command sent was the name of the command, and then that command output was the name of the output. And so that gives us basically a clean file and to then have humans read. So we can see our show IP interface brief output. The command sent was show IP interface brief. And then the command output, and you can scroll down and see the other ones as well. So yeah. And one other thing that I wanted to show is basically I also have an example of doing this all within one playbook. We have playbook pre-post, I think here, where I didn't do it in roles. I just did it all in one playbook. You can see how wordy it is. I mean, it's like almost 100 lines of YAML.
It's really hard to follow, actually.
And one other thing I'll mention here is I added kind of a neat feature where I use the Linux diff to do a diff between the pre and the post, and then dump that into a diffs folder. So I've just covered a lot of different things. Those are not all role features. The roles just help us hide away the complexities. And so from the user, all they see when they look at the playbook is this is still not super, super simple, but it's simple enough where someone who doesn't need to know all the complexities can just know, I want to do pre-post checks. And I'm doing the pre. I want to do some type of configuration. So I'm importing my configuration, and then I want to do some type of post checks. And then behind the scenes, it's creating directories based on the name of the device. It's creating subdirectories based on whether it was a pre-change or a post-change, and then creates a separate directory for diffs, doing it basically a Linux between the pre and the post, and creating a file based on that device name, saying, hey, here's the difference between the pre and the post for you.
You've definitely showcased that, like how easy it is, and not necessarily easy, but how useful it is to leverage Ansible roles in your playbook. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have. Snackers, if you like to play with all of what Jason has, it sounds like it's on Code Exchange, on DevNet Code Exchange, so check it out. I'm sure we'll post a link somewhere here on our screen for you.
Right
and,
here. Yeah.
And Jason, this is awesome. I really appreciated the demo. I love the fact that you had all of the comments in every single section to tell me what it is. That's not always in every single code. So appreciated that. Snackers, thank you for your time, and see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.